Wow. I mean, you know, I don't get this many people to a yoga class. That would be wrapped. Maybe so too, sometimes. So, distinguished guests, sorry? Yeah, that's fine. Distinguished guests, family and friends of Ross, interlopers, gate crashers, and anyone who walked in here by mistake thinking this was the pokies room. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the greatest show on earth. This is the Ross Coleman Show, or as Dad would say, this is a Ross Coleman production. That's what Dad always used to say. I think my old man was one of the first blokes in England back in the 50s to own a Grundig reel-to-reel tape recorder, which he used to impersonate Gurney Slade, aka Anthony Newley, in a mock radio TV show at a party he and Mum threw back at our little council flat in Horton Road, Hollingdean, right, before we made the voyage to Australia. That's right, we had a little council flat, just like in the song, My Old Man's a Dustman. Only Dad was a bit smart, without wishing to denigrate Dustman, my dad was a bit smarter than Dustman. Later on in Altona, Dad moved on to shooting videos. Well, I think they were 8mm films, actually, of the family, and they were invariably signed off with the credit line, "This is a Ross Coleman production." I'm not sure about the rest of my family, but I just love that daggy side of my dad. As my son Carl said in his concise but moving tribute to his granddad, Ross was a true romantic, a bloke who went to war and fell in love. This is a Ross Coleman production, because one way or another, most of us here today are either a product or a byproduct of Ross. And as my sister Angela mentioned to me earlier this week, Ross would be chuffed to think that we would put on a turn like this for him. No. He'd also be pretty pissed off at the thought of him not being here with us today as a centre of attention.
To do his Chattanooga.
Yeah, in another sense, he is very much here with us today. And I'm sure Sylvia Altair, my sister-in-law, would relate to this when I say, I feel like I'm a bit like at the concert for George, the tribute show Eric Clapton organised for the late George Harrison. Okay, it's not the Albert Hall, it's the Seaview Lounge. But I'm sure our father Ross would feel at home here. After all, it's a seaside location, and Dad spent most of his life living by the seaside. Firstly in Brighton, England, hometown of people like Red Simons and Fatboy Slim, and later in Altona, a town he and former Prime Minister Julia Gillard grew to love. Dad would also feel good to be here because there's a pokies room close by. And also there's a smoking area out here just behind me. And he would remember when he came here to play bingo with Mum and Kevin Gunn's mum. I think Kevin's here today. Lovely to see all my friends from Rosefield here. Getting back to the concert for George, there's a poignant moment when Ravi Shankar, I'm having trouble with this, when Ravi Shankar, the great Indian sitar player and father of Norah Jones, comes on stage and says, I feel George is with us tonight. I feel that Ross is with us here today. Otherwise, what the heck are we all doing here? And on that note, on behalf of the Coleman, Morley and extended families, I'd like to thank you all for the loving support you've shown us today and all this week. We've been overwhelmed by the waves of condolences, the flowers and affection received from home and abroad, and as far away as Iceland, England and Germany, from where Ross's nephews and niece, Peter and John Coleman, Robert Hoffman and sister Anna Gray have sent sincere messages mourning their uncle. And as we heard from Ange, we've also received a touching message from our son Carl, Dad's grandson in Denmark. Getting back to Ravi Shankar, I reckon if Ross isn't with us today, there's a fair chance he's riding that Chattanooga choo-choo. And he's riding it with Glenn Miller and Deanna Durbin. Deanna Durbin, one of his favourite singers. Or he's eating ham and eggs for dinner in the diner in Carolina with his darling Val. My earliest memories of Dad go back to Bedford Place or Bedford Square in Brighton when we lived in the basement of the news agency Dad ran for a while. I was a toddler and my sister Angela a babe. Angela still is a babe. We had a poodle cross called Charlie, and one day he disappeared. I must have been messing with doggy do or something, because our mum Val was very, very house proud. Just never saw that dog again. Ross and Val later adopted a pigeon with a broken wing or leg. That didn't work out either. Because I have this vivid recollection of Dad putting it out of its misery with a hammer. It seemed like a cruel act at the time, but I'm sure Dad had the poor bird's best interests at heart. Because our Dad wasn't a cruel man, he was a kind and gentle man, behind the exterior we sometimes saw as kids. I won't go into the story of all the cats, including Mimi, the tomcat that we had to get put down before we came to Australia. My next memory of Dad was when I fell down a full flight of stairs at Beaconsfield Parade, where Brother Dickie was born, and I hit my head on a coal bunker. Dad picked me up as I screamed in shock. This was special because my younger sister Angela was his favourite in those days. Times were tough in England after the war, and Mum and Dad were raising 3 kids on one meagre income before Mum went to work. One day, the gas inspector arrived to collect the shillings from our gas meter in Horton Road. And I think you know where this one's going, Dickie. I wasn't sure whether to tell this story. When the gas man opened the meter, it was full of old washers. Mum was red with rage and embarrassment. She was a bit of a movie star, my mum, but God, she had a temper if Dad did the wrong thing. She got me to race down to the post office at the Dip on the way to Ditchling Road to cash in 10 shillings of my national savings stamps to pay the bill. I can still remember pedalling down on my Mobo scooter, crying all the way to my piggy bank. My Dad had found a key that opened the meter and had borrowed a few bob for his bus fare to work. He copped it big time from Mum when he got home. She demanded the key and said, "You'll be paying back your sum with interest." And I must say my beautiful Dad has done that for the rest of his life, tenfold. Later on, when I passed the 13 plus exam in England but failed the interview to go to grammar school, that was my sister Angela, Dad, at Mum's urging, fronted the education director in Brighton at Mum's urging, wanting to know why there'd been face fitting and his son had missed out. He went into bat for me, and I reckon our father has always been there for us when the chips were down. I still remember him running through a hailstorm in his raincoat and cheese-cutter cap to rescue my sister, brother and I when we got caught in a scary thunderstorm on the way to Sunday school one afternoon. I know Dickie and Angela were wrapped because we didn't have to go to Sunday school. When we came to Australia, Dad said, "We're not going back." He had no intention of being a winching pom. I'll always remember sitting at the tea table in Brighton when Dad got Angela, Dickie and I to put it to the vote. We're going to Germany or Australia? We didn't much relish the idea of wearing lederhosen to work, and my sister Angela loathed the woolen underwear from our German rallies that Mum made her wear. So we opted for football, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars, and set sail on the fair sky. Our Dad's ship had come home, as my sister beautifully put it. After a hellish year in tin Nissen huts at the Brooklyn migrant hostel, we settled in Altona to a new life. Angela and I were in horsey heaven with Tony Merrill's riding school next door. Dad caught the Altona bus to work at GJ Coles in Footscray, where he worked as head storeman. He worked as head storeman 5.5 days a week, and I still remember him picking up all the volcanic rocks and boulders, as we said he was a collector, in a wheelbarrow in Purnell Street to build the low stone wall around our backyard. Before he left Coles, he bought himself a maroon Toyota Crown, which he drove to his job as purchasing officer at Australian Synthetic Rubber in Altona. Dad wasn't a good driver though, because it was mainly bikes and buses in Britain. On the way to my passing out parade at Puckapunyal before I went to Vietnam, Dad ran into the back of another car. Sister Angela screamed, my mother said, and my brother-in-law Brian Morley drove the rest of the way to Pucka in the damaged vehicle. And they missed my big moment. Dad's driving didn't improve when he graduated to a battery-driven scooter in his 80s, not when he was in his 80s. Helen Keating, who I think's here today, said he nearly ran her over in Pier Street the other day. Sorry, Helen. He must have been on a mission or in a hurry to the TAB. By this time, Dad was getting a tad sad and lonely after his beloved wife Val died 14 years ago in 1999. but Dad soldiered on much better than we expected. Despite all the efforts of my brother Dick, niece Megan and sister-in-law Christine to cut his hair, you know where I'm going now, he kept growing it long like his hero, Andre Reur. And his fingernails grew longer like Howard Hughes. When Dad went for a hearing check in Altona North, I took him along. He told his audiologist he was growing his hair long like Andre Reur. The bemused young man said, it works for some, Ross. That said, I realise now our Dad was a man of many layers. On the surface, your average suburban Joe. But on another level, there was so much more to this man. Ross Coleman, lover, fighter, soldier, soldier of fortune, hunter and collector, hoarder, stamp collector, archivist, storyteller, musician, gambler, and occasional grafter, as his Scottish mate Jock Mackay once called him. Dart and cards player extraordinaire. Dad was Harold Steptoe and Arthur Adaminder combined. He recycled everything. He was the original Greenie before they were heard of. The more I reflect on my dad, the more fascinating layers of him I discover. And like my siblings Angela and Richard, I feel so privileged that he was part of our lives. Dad, you were the best, a one-off, the youngest of 7 sons. And I relate to the Davis family here because they're full of boys. And it's also lovely to see Maria Altair here too, my beautiful mother-in-law. Thanks for making the effort, Maria. My brother Dickie and I feel blessed to call ourselves sons of the 7th son. You will live in our hearts forever. I'd now like to just finish off by, I'm sure Dad won't mind, just by wearing my Yoda teacher's hat. I'm just going to ask you all for a moment just to close your eyes. Think of Ross, just close your eyes. And I just want to say to Dad, I honour that place in you, where the entire universe resides. A place of love and light, and truth and calm, where when you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, we are in the same place. Namaste.
Namaste.
And then in Dad's honour, I just also want to say, zigga zagga, zigga zagga!
Oi, oi, oi!
Thank you.